The 2025 NFL Draft is right around the corner, so I had to bring on one of my favorite draft experts to dish out all the info on the Colts' top fits. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Hicks, your resident film nerd of HorseshoeHuddle.com. And I'm joined today by one of my favorite draft experts in the industry, and that is Ian Cummings over at Pro Football Network. You guys might not know him, but I've known Ian since we were in our early 20s, maybe late teens, honestly, Ian, at this point. And now I'm pushing 30. So I've known Ian for a long time. He's fantastic at what he does. Really love bringing him on the show here to dive into prospects. He hasn't been as active this year, but now that I see him really popping into that draft stuff, I knew I had to get him on to dish out some info on the Colts' best fits in this class. So today, we're going to talk about the usual suspects, but with this new insight here on the show. So we're going to talk about some of the more underrated prospects, the Damian Martinez types, the Smal Mundens, the Tate Ratledge guys. But then we're going to talk again about the usual suspects, the Carson Schwessingers, the Jihaad Campbells, and of course, the Tyler Warrens. So, Ian, I know you're not super active in the Indy stratosphere of NFL and coverage because you're so deep into the draft stuff. But the Colts media and Colts fans have been clamoring for Tyler Warren probably since like November of this past year. The second that it was announced that the Colts are getting the 14th overall selection, that became everyone's favorite guy at 14. So I want to ask you, Ian, is Tyler Warren a guy for you that's worth the 14th overall pick, or do you think he's kind of getting pushed up because this is a weaker draft at the top?
I think he is worth the pick at 14, and he is a pretty high grade for me. He's my tight end one. Now, Colston Loveland is right there with him for me. I love both players. I think stylistically they're a little different, but Tyler Warren is just, to me, he's so well-rounded. I mean, Loveland scores a little bit higher on the route running and the explosiveness just because I think Loveland's a little more fluid. I think the route tree is a little bit wider with him, but that's not a slight because Loveland is so versatile with that. I think Tyler Warren gives you that all-encompassing usage versatility, right? And that's kind of what we saw at Penn State. Like, they're doing Wildcat QB snaps with him, right? And I think his main appeal at the NFL level is that you can use him as a big slot. You can use him inline, off motions, right? He's got a pretty good route tree when it comes to 90-degree outbreakers, right? He's got pretty good hip flexibility when it comes to making sharp diversions, pretty explosive outbreaks too. But I think another thing that comes off of that too is he does the little things so well. I mean, I think that goes overlooked when you're talking about Tyler Warren's tape because you see him out muscling guys, just like, out maneuvering them. He's super physical. He's got that alpha mentality. We know that. But you can also see him stemming guys off the snap with the angle IQ, working DBs off balance in space, and then working up the seam at the catch point as well. Really good using late hands, not just his body, but also his body positioning to control guys so that he can make the optimal play at the catch. So, and then to be honest, on top of that too, he catches almost everything. Like, he's got hands of steel. He's got incredible instincts too. So just a very reliable, well-rounded player that also has that kind of high upside explosive rat component that you want to see. Not like not like elite accelerative capacity, but when he can, start to roll some steam in space, he's tough to take down, and he's going to give you everything he's got when it comes to physicality. So really well-rounded player with a lot of usage parameters, and I think that versatility combined with the reliability, for me, that's what makes him that top-end player. So at 14, I think it's a phenomenal fit, and especially for the Indianapolis Colts, having that kind of versatile, glue guy in your offense where he can do anything that you need him to. He can be that target funnel in clutch situations. He can be a design rack threat, a seam threat. There's really nothing that's off the table for Tyler Warren, and that's what I love about his game.
Yeah, for sure. I think he's still my tight end one in the draft, even though at times I feel like I'm down on Tyler Warren compared to other people just because he's not the Brock Bowers type of prospect, but that's fine. You could still be a very good tight end prospect without being Brock Bowers.
Yeah.
And I think, like you mentioned with Tyler Warren, that versatility, the Colts want to live in 11 personnel. They haven't been able to do that in Shane Steichen's time because their tight ends have been Mo Alley Cox, Drew Ogletree, Kylan Granson, these very role-specific tight ends. So Warren's a guy from day one who can step in and do it all and be your alpha tight end. And also, like you said, he catches everything. He's just a ball winner. When the ball is in the air, he's going to win that 50-50 ball and turn it into an 80-20. And I'm curious for you as an evaluator, we always say this with wide receivers, like, don't put too much stock in the receivers that win the 50-50 balls because it's harder in the NFL. So how do you view that when it comes to a tight end like Tyler Warren, where maybe the separation isn't there compared to like a Colston Loveland, but when the ball arrives, he's coming down with it?
Yeah, it's a really unique conversation because a lot of his catches were kind of that type of deal where he does have a defender inside his frame, right? And you want to balance how projectable is that, but then also can we project off of other components of his game, right? I look at the route running. Every time I watch him, I think to myself, I still think he's a little underrated as a route runner, right? He's never going to be a guy who shakes you out of your shoes, right? He's never going to be that all-encompassing route weapon like Colston Loveland is projected to be. But again, when you talk about footwork efficiency, right? On those in breakers, those out breakers, I really think he's pretty sufficient at pressing into breaks, hinging sharp direction changes, and then the zone IQ to stem guys and explode into space. Like, I think all of those components are there for him to be a really sufficient route runner at the next level, not an elite guy who's going to route DBs and, separate independently all the time and man against man coverage. But if you need a guy to beat zone looks up the seam, to beat off-man looks up the seam, to work over the middle of the field and make tough catches there on out routes, to make little conversion catches. He's got all of those tools in his toolbox. So, not a guy who's going to be that elite route running game changer X factor, but a guy who has enough of a pretty high floor there, in my opinion. And then he bridges it with all the other stuff, the elite catching instincts, the elite hands, the rack ability. And then he's a pretty good blocker too. I think he can continue to improve engaging his hands at the contact point. But when it comes to the physical tools, those things are all there too. So I think that combined with usage versatility, you can line them up anywhere, you can do anything you want with them. All of those things provide a pretty appealing fail-safe as a prospect.
Yeah, for sure. And moving on to another guy who maybe this is more of my manufacturing him to the Indianapolis Colts, because if every media person's saying Tyler Warren, the one guy that I've been stomping my feet for is Jihaad Campbell from Alabama. 20-year-old linebacker prospect who rushed off the edge at times, who showed some good coverage ability, who is this super high-end athlete. For me, again, in this class, it doesn't have many blue chippers. I know he's at linebacker and off-ball linebacker spot, so it's a position you don't typically want to take in round one. But for me, he's a blue chip player. But Ian, what are your thoughts on Jihaad Campbell? And am I a little bit too high on this guy, or am I justified for loving him like I do?
I think you're justified. I really do. There's some player archetypes where you just kind of have to love it, right? And I think Jihaad Campbell, I turned on the tape for him. The first game I watched was the LSU game. And
Yes.
it was one of the reps that I saw of him in coverage that really won me over, because I knew he was a former edge recruit. I knew he had that kind of background. But he's over here off man as a big nickel defender against Kyron Lacey. And he's routing him up on third down in man coverage, using that short area quickness, using that efficient plant and drive technique. And then he's disrupting at the catch point. All of those things that you want in that all-encompassing linebacker show up for Jihaad Campbell. He's incredibly explosive. When he has a runway to get to the QB through the A gap, I mean, his long strides, I don't know why I said streets. I can't talk today. The long strides, they just chew up space, man. And, QBs, they got to be terrified of him because he gets there in a blink, man. Like, you take half a second, you pause for too long, and he is right there in your hip pocket, and he's taking you down for the sack. I think, on top of that too, the closing speed when he has a runway, a lot of linebackers make their money as a blitzing threat with just runways as a stunter, taking advantage of space. But Jihaad Campbell can work around the edge. He can bend beneath the apex. He's got that cornering ability, pretty enticing flashes of speed to power, and then working off of that with rip moves too. I think he can continue to improve his play strength as he works at the NFL level. I think that's the big thing keeping him from being that elite pass rushing weapon from day one. Is just, you got to get to NFL play strength. But aside from that, I really think all of those components are there, physical components, and then having an understanding of how to win one-on-one. I think those are all there. The biggest red flag for me with Jihaad Campbell, and it's not really a red flag because I think in run defense, he is a very good processor. I think he can, sift through misdirection. I think he's pretty good tracking laterally and sifting through gaps. But when it comes to take on technique at blocks, right? There are some times where he's a little more passive than I would want. I want linebackers to be able to, dish out contact, to take control at the second level when it comes to linemen moving up, right? And Jihaad Campbell will be a little passive sometimes with his lighter frame as well. That can enable him to be directed off the snap and kind of, moved downfield. And then linemen can pave open lanes for runners, right? So I think run defense, just kind of managing and controlling the point, that's where he stands to improve. But if you want a guy who can play coverage, zone coverage, and then off man in the slot as well against tight ends and even bigger receivers, I mean, he's got that ability. He's fluid, he's agile, he's explosive, he's long, and really all the components are there for him to be that potential blue chip linebacker if he can continue to improve his play strength and his take on technique. So I like him a lot. He's a top 15 player for me right now, and I think for the Colts in particular, if you have a vision for him, he can be a really, really good player.
Yeah, part of that puzzle is Louis Anarumo coming in here to Indianapolis, where Jermaine Pratt was rushing 150 snaps a year off the edge. Not really like rushing, but on rundown snaps. Yeah. When they go to odd fronts, they're putting Jermaine Pratt off the edge. You can get those edge snaps in here with Jihaad Campbell. You can get him pass rushing. You can get him in coverage. And again, only 20 years old. I am so intrigued by him at the next level. But coming up, guys, we're going to transition to some day 2 targets that we have been talking about all offseason for the Colts in Mason Taylor and Carson Schwessinger. We're going to dive into those games real quick. But first, have you guys ever checked your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start building your wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget a little bit smarter and save much, much more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever, and you can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without all that stress. So take control of finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Alrighty, Locked On Colts Everydayers, we are back with Ian Cummings to talk all about the top fits in the Colts draft. Again, you know these players, you love these players because I've been talking about them all draft season, but Ian here is on to put a pretty little bow on a lot of these prospects and either validate me or push back against me, but Ian's probably going to validate me. Again, I've known this guy for a long time. So we're going to talk about Mason Taylor now, the tight end out of LSU. So we talked about Tyler Warren in the first segment. Now that's the Colts' ideal pick at 14. But if they miss out on a Tyler Warren or even miss out on Colston Loveland in round 1, Mason Taylor to me seems like the perfect guy on day 2, where you can still live in 11 personnel with him because he's a good enough blocker, still only 20 years old, showed some pass catching prowess. And again, to me, my comp for him is Hunter Henry, which is a guy who worked with Shane Steichen in the past. So Ian, what are your thoughts on Mason Taylor? And do you think he can be, a full-time starting tight end in the NFL?
I do. He's my tight end 3 right now, and he'll probably be a top 50 player for me on my board when it's all said and done. I really like the combination of upside, but then also immediate utility that you get with him. And I think it's kind of a unique balance that you get, looking at his LSU tape. I think the route running, his route tree wasn't as expansive as it could have been with the skill set. But there are some of those plays where you see, like, if he's breaking a deep post out of the slot, right, where he's bending around the DB, right. One of the first things that you look at when you look at a prospect, for me, I know we were talking about before the pod, we both kind of noticed this really early on, is just how they move, right? It sounds simple, but like stride frequency, bend, flexibility, explosion, all of those things. How easy does this prospect make it just moving on the football field? And Mason Taylor makes it look really easy. I mean, he's kind of a short strider, but he's really flexible, really fluid, really explosive with those really energetic strides. And with that combination of ankle mobility, lower body flexibility, explosive capacity as an athlete, he can accelerate out of breaks. He can bend through breaks without losing any speed. And then he's got pretty good malleability when it comes to really sharp transitions too, on whip routes and digs and things like that. So, I really think the skill set is there for an all-encompassing route tree. And then he's got soft hands at the catch point. He's really good at adjusting, getting his body in the right spot. He's a quiet catcher. That's kind of my term for him. He doesn't really make it too hard. He's very efficient, just getting where he needs to be, getting the ball in his hands. And then he's really quick when it comes to adjusting his feet for rack too. That's another thing I love about his tape. Some tight ends, they make an adjustment for the rack phase. They're a little plodding. It takes a little bit for them to get their hips around. Mason Taylor corrects his positioning and his hip alignment really effortlessly. And then he's working upfield. He's pretty good through contact. Really just a 3-level threat as a tight end, which is odd. You don't always expect a guy to be this well-rounded when it comes to his receiving projection. Obviously, a little bit of a projection when it comes to, getting that full route tree. But when I look at route runners at tight end, I look at the building blocks. I look at the flexibility. I look at the spatial IQ. I look at the explosion. And I really think Mason Taylor has all of those things. The blocking is the biggest thing, I think. But even there, as you said, he's willing. He has enough size and power, I think. For him, it's going to be the technique work, getting a little bit stronger from a play strength perspective. I think he's strong enough when you just talk about like human strength, but I think there's room for him to engage his lower body a little more when he's driving guys. I do think he can divert upright a little bit, which kind of inhibits his ability to generate power from his lower body, but then also can allow other defenders to set the edge and cave it in. So, I think continuing to refine that leverage game is going to be a big part of his development, his process as a blocker. But as a receiving threat, you talk about movement efficiency, you talk about soft hands, you talk about rack ability and receiving upside and route running upside. He's got all those things. So top 50 player for me. And if you're the Colts, you're looking at the valuation of the board. If you were to get Jihaad Campbell in round 1 and Mason Taylor in round 2, I would call that a victory for sure.
Yeah, that's what we've been talking about on here. Actually, I think I contributed to my co-host Jake Arthur wrote an article for Horseshoe Huddle today, and he said, "What would your dream first 2 rounds be?" And my dream first 2 rounds were Jihaad Campbell and then Mason Taylor. But let's talk about the other potential dream first 2 rounds, and that's Tyler Warren at 14 and then Carson Schlesinger in round 2, who is a linebacker who's picking up a lot of steam throughout this draft cycle, a former walk-on, I believe, at UCLA. Didn't really get to see the field until this past year, but when he did see the field, looked like one of the best linebackers in all of college football. Played some really, really great, productive football last season. And for a Colts team that's been looking for a coverage linebacker for, heck, since I've been covering the team, you could argue since Shaquille Leonard had his unfortunate downfall due to injuries. What are you seeing with Carson Schlesinger? Do you see this high-end guy who's getting all the hype that he's getting this process?
Yeah, I was a really big fan of his tape. I was getting to these guys. I'm working through top 10s for PFN right now. So I did a lot of offense last week and I'm working through defense this week. And I managed to get this Schlesinger. God, that's going to be so hard to say, man. I got to Carson today.
Carson.
I'll go with that. I'll go with that. I still got to practice the pronunciation, man. It's crazy. But I got to Carson today and looking at the tape, I think out of the 3 linebackers that I watched for this podcast, I think he's probably the most instinctive in the box. I think he's the guy who processes play flow differences really quickly, and he can adapt very well as he's working at the ball. I think he's explosive, confident coming downhill, but he has a good mix of patience and decisiveness. He's not a guy who's going to overrun things too often. He uses blocking looks to diagnose where the gap is that the runner's going to go to, and then he flows to it with rapid speed. I mean, he's one of those guys where processing and play pace really come together, and that's what I love about his game. In coverage as well, I think in zone, he's really fleet-footed. Some guys are plodding a little bit, but he's got really fast foot speed. He's really fluid on transitions, and he can make sharp transitions and respond downhill very quickly. And that goes back to the processing, the quick trigger and the elite explosive capacity. He jumped, I think, 39.5 inches in the vertical. And that acceleration shows up on tape. I mean, he has rockets on his feet. He's got jets. So, it's really fun to watch him, play and respond like that because he's always flown to the football, always around it. I think the biggest thing for Schlesinger, God, oh my goodness, that's gonna be so difficult, man. I gotta say that in the mirror 10 times a day every morning. Yeah. I'll get it eventually. But the thing with Carson is that I think while he's a great box invader, he's really good at knifing through gaps. I do think he can improve his take on technique. Again, kind of similar to Jihaad Campbell. He's got sub 32-inch arms. I do think there are a lot of times where he relies on that responsiveness and that closing speed to just beat angles. And he's really good at doing that because he's so smart and instinctive. But there are times where you meet a lineman in space at the second level and they're coming right at you. You can't really avoid them. You're going to have to, take that block on, control the point, and limit displacement so that you can stack, shed, get around them, and make the tackle. Because if you give yourself up just trying to go for the big play, you might wash yourself out of the play, and then the RB has a path upfield. So at the NFL level, you're going to have to be able to take on blocks, and I think Carson can improve at that. I think he has the ability to do that because when you're a linebacker at the second level, the advantage you have on the offensive lineman is you're usually more explosive. You can spring up, you can enter contact proactively, and you can get underneath them too. So I think that the leverage play, the explosion, the physicality, the proactivity when it comes to intelligence, those things all work in Carson's favor. But I do think he can improve his take on technique, and naturally, having a little bit shorter arms is going to be an issue for him from time to time. I don't think he's ever going to get away from that, but he's instinctive, he's explosive, and he's a really good coverage player, and he's very good as a pass rusher too. I don't think he's quite at Campbell's level when it comes to upside, but I do think the explosion, he's got pretty good bend and cornering ability. There were some crazy reps where he's blitzing up the A gap, bending around a blocker and making the tackle in pursuit. So he's got that ability as well. So I really like Carson. He's a fringe first round player for me. And I think if the Colts were able to get him mid round 2, that would be phenomenal value. Whether you want Tyler Warren and Carson or Jihaad Campbell and Mason Taylor, I don't think either of those is a wrong answer, right? It just kind of depends on your preference, but he's a very good player.
Yeah, absolutely. I think either one of those scenarios would be great for the Colts. You get your linebacker of the future, you get your tight end of the future, and you're rolling from there. But coming up, guys, we're going to transition to more round 3/day 3 type guys that I have personally heard the Colts are pretty interested in. So if you've stuck with us throughout the show so far, make sure you're tuning in for this next section because you get a little bit of info from me coming up in just a second. But first, March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. FanDuel makes it easy to back your picks with spreads, totals, and game props with men's and women's tournaments happening all the time. There's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly, no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, Locked On Colts Everydayers, we are back talking all about the upcoming 2025 NFL Draft. We're joined by Ian Cummings, the expert over at Pro Football Network. And now we're going to transition to more, again, round 3, day 3 type guys. I think once you get into round 3, it gets a little dicey on where these guys actually could go. You never know what's going on behind the scenes, but I feel pretty comfortable that the Colts like these 3 players. And we're going to kick it off with a guy who, when I gave you his name, you told me right when you jumped on here that you kind of got into his film quite a bit, and that's Smail Mondon from Georgia, the linebacker who I believe he was a defensive back earlier in his career, moved to some linebacker at Georgia. You could really see it in his film, in my opinion. I was watching his film the other day for an article at horseshoehuddle.com, and you could really see some of those defensive back instincts, great speed, really fun blitzer, fun in the run game. Georgia had him playing some star position this past year. You could see him out there over the slot. So what really did you like about Mondon's game when you watched the film this past season?
Yeah, he's always been a player that I've been aware of. He was a former 5-star recruit, so that pedigree really shows up on film. Being 6'3", around 229, almost 33-inch arms. So, of these 3 guys that we watched, like even Campbell, he's got length, but I think Mondon's a little bit longer, and it definitely shows with his reach and what he can do with that. But showing up on tape, the physical ability. I mean, right away, this is a guy who, like you said, is playing in the slot, and he's planning and driving over, big slot receivers and tight ends. And I think that's really where the crux of his upside comes at the NFL level. Is this guy, I think, can be a legitimate, sub package, big nickel, linebacker who can erase tight ends because he's quicker than they are and he's faster than a lot of them too. Like he's got that vertical speed where he can match you up the seam, but then he can also close ground in pursuit. So Mondon was a really fun watch. And I think, in particular, I think when it comes to coverage, a lot of linebackers can be explosive and long. But I think Smail Mondon really, and going back to what you said, former defensive back, I think he reduces really well for his size. I think the foot speed, the flexibility where he can sink his hips and transition, and there's not much of a hitch there at all. I think he's a guy who can survive an off-man coverage and he can match guys, and he plays feet first and off-man, which I love. He's patient, he's disciplined, but he's also really quick to play and drive, and he's pretty efficient with that too. I also liked, some of what I saw in run defense. I think when it comes to processing in congestion, he can be a little up and down there, but there were some really good flashes of him staying composed, staying square to his gap, and using his length to kind of scrape past blockers and maintain depth without getting worked too far upfield, right? And then he can use his length to make the tackle. That same flexibility that helps him in coverage, he can use that to make really late tackle adjustments. So he's worked out of position and he can still wrap up and drag guys down. So really love that malleability to his game. He's pretty, good at withstanding adversity. And I also think, of the three guys that I watched, his take on impressed me the most probably when it comes to taking on blocks. I think he's a guy who can acquire leverage with his lower body. He can use his length to stack guys, and there was some shedding there too. I do think he can improve his play strength. I do think he can be a little more consistent when it comes to processing, because there are times where, whether it's a misdirection or a pressing runner who's pressing behind a block, they can work him off. They can offset him pretty easily, and he can make an incorrect lateral adjustment and then work himself out of play, right? So there's still room to improve that part of his game. But Mondon can be a coverage chess piece for you. I really do believe that. And then he's got some upside as a pass rusher as well. Again, you want him to expand that pass rushing bag, but again, explosive, super malleable, and a workman-like player who really improved over his Georgia career. I think he'll be a great locker room guy too. So, just getting him in that rotation, a lot of pluses for me. I think continuing to get stronger, and I don't know how much room he has before he's maxed out. I think he's 229 right now. Don't know if he can put too much on without losing that coverage, that coverage ability that makes him so special. But if you get him as a sub package guy, like you said, I think there's a lot of upside there. And if he can become more consistent with his box instincts, he could become even more than that. I think there's a lot of upside there. He's kind of a day two guy for me, but when I ran his grade, I was not sure what to expect. So crunching the numbers really impressed me on film.
Yeah, it's funny. I had a hot take on here last week where I was like, look, if you missed out on Schlesinger, don't reach for another linebacker on day 2 in this draft if you're the Colts. And that was kind of my hot take on here. And then I watched Mondon over the weekend, and I was like, well, I might have found another one. So maybe
there's an adjustment.
Yeah, I might have to make a slight adjustment to the hot take, guys. So depending on if the Colts take him or not, you'll see one part of this podcast after draft day with me touting myself as correct. But that's the fun of an audio medium there. But we want to talk about one more player here, and that is running back Damian Martinez from Miami. So a lot of Colts fans have wanted the pass catching complement to Jonathan Taylor. That has been what they've been going for the last couple of years. We missed it with Nyheim Hines being gone the last few years, but my gut is telling me the Colts more so want their Zach Moss replacement. They did not have that Zach Moss level running back last year in Trey Sermon, who just did not have a good year for the Colts. So I think they want to get back to having a Zach Moss-like player, and Damian Martinez on film. Maybe Zach Moss like times 1.5, times 2, because all the things that Moss does well in the NFL with the contact balance, with the power, Damian Martinez in college looks like, one of those old commercials with like the mascot, like Blue, the Colts mascot running over children, basically. Like Damian Martinez is running through guys. So what are your thoughts on Damian Martinez? Even though he's not such a pass catcher in college, such a fun runner at Miami last year.
Oh yeah, for sure. I would go as far as to say Zach Moss times 2.5. I mean, I'm a big fan of Damian Martinez, and I think the thing with him that's really interesting is you look at his frame, how he's built, and he was listed as heavy as like 240 at Oregon State, right? You're watching that tape initially, and when you're an evaluator, you read those tea leaves and you kind of get an impression of a guy, right? You read 6 foot, 225, over 220, like you're gonna think, and he weighed in at 217 at the combine, but he'll probably be in the 220s as playing weight. But you see that and you're thinking, okay, brawler, bruiser. I got the gist, right? Like downhill runner. But his creative instincts and vision, his flexibility, lateral, range is incredible for his size. It really is. I mean, I think he's, a lot more than he's chalked up to be on the surface. He's got the looks when it comes to a power back, but, he's so good at patiently navigating lanes, at picking out lanes, like whether it's a gap scheme and waiting for his blocks to play out, or a zone scheme and like pressing behind and using that explosion and that bend to play to spacing. I really think he's a high level runner when it comes to those two components too. And then you look at the pass blocking on third downs as well. Like, he's a very good pass blocker. He'll play square. He will use tight hands. A lot of components that bode well for his future at the NFL level. And you go back to Zach Moss in that lens. What do you look for in a backup running back, in a RB2, right? Either a guy who can be a pass catcher for you, or, someone who you can be comfortable getting him out there on third downs as a pass blocker. You don't have to worry about your QB safety. Those two things, are what you really want. And then to have that change of pace and potential volume ability if Jonathan Taylor does go down. Damian Martinez checks all of those boxes for me. But, mainly it's like the dichotomy of looking like a power back and having the contact balance and the physicality of a power back, but also having the first and second level creativity and flexibility to actually create opportunities for yourself and then finish with physicality. Martinez checks all those boxes. The only category where he didn't grade exceptionally for me was receiving. And that's mainly because we don't have a ton of volume there. I do think there's a lot for him to prove, but there are also some flashes of him taking catches out of the backfield. Again, he has a lot of space in those instances. A lot of the time, I think he's going to be someone that you'll probably have to scheme open field rack targets too on swings and screens, and that's pretty much it day one. But as a change of pace runner who can take volume and then protect your passer on third down, he checks a lot of boxes. So I think the only question is, does someone take him before the Colts do, before they intend to? Because I really think he could go round 2 in this RB class. This RB class, it's tough to see how it settles out. But as we saw with like a Zach Charbonnet pick, right? All it takes is one team to be really head over heels for a guy, and they'll take him pretty early. So I think, how these teams stack those guys up, and we'll see the variance on day 2.
Yeah, definitely. And real quick, I wanted to get your thoughts on this, because you're someone who's, again, validating what my thoughts were. I had a couple back and forths with people regarding Martinez's pass blocking, where I watched 4 or 5 games of his this past year, and I was really intrigued by his pass. I thought it was really good watching his pass blocking. Really good eyes, good technique. I think there was maybe 2 or 3 reps that he would like to have back, but all running backs have those. No one's a perfect pass blocking running back, So when I was watching this film, I thought this is a very good pass blocking running back with the potential to be even better. So real quick, I know we're short on time here, but again, you're high on his pass blocking ability?
Yeah, I am. I think he plays square really well. I think he's very physical and he'll acquire leverage pretty well. And then he's got pretty good vision when it comes to delayed blitzers. That
Yes.
lateral mobility helps him out a ton. I do think there are some times where, he'll pop him and he's really physical at the point, and then maybe can improve at, sustaining blocks, right? And making sure the guys don't get to the QB on second effort attempts. But overall, honestly, he's probably one of the better running backs in the class when it comes to pass blocking. There's a few guys at the top kind of on the podium, and I think he's right there with him. And then he's got, but he has the size and the measurables to hold up at the NFL level as well, which is kind of an added, little comforting boost.
Awesome. Yeah, I completely agree. I'm glad that, again, I have you in my corner on that one, because a few people push, but maybe it was his PFF grade or something is maybe what we're making people be down on it. But for me, I saw a very good pass blocking running back on film with Damian Martinez. But that is all we have for today, guys. That's our 6 prospect breakdowns. I'm sure if you guys send enough love in the comment section, we'll bring Ian back on for more episodes, breaking down even more prospects. We only have 30 minutes on this show, so Ian and I can only get into like 6 prospects with how long-winded we are as people, but it was fun. It was fun breaking down the core 6 right here. We want to thank you guys for making Locked On Colts your first listen today and every day. Now, for your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Draft with Damian Parsons and Keith Sanchez. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you guys don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, at Zach Hicks 2, and at IC_draft, and all of his work over at Pro Football Network. Again, he hasn't been as active this year because you said you've been busy with like your degree, is what you said, right, Ian?
PFN actually moved me away from the draft
Oh,
for like
okay,
4 or
okay.
5 months. So they moved me back to it in March. So I've
That's
been
what it
playing
was.
catch up a lot of the time. But it's good. I have the time and the resources to watch film and put grades together. And so we've been making a lot of progress the past few weeks. We still got a long way to go, but the class is starting to come into picture, and I'm really happy to be back. Evaluating, but also chopping it up with people like you and my followers, and everyone who's out there in the space. It's been a lot of fun to get back into it.
Awesome. Awesome. So make sure you guys are following Ian there on social medias. He does some great work. And also subscribe to us on YouTube and all your Locked On Colts stuff. And we'll be back with you guys again tomorrow for another fun show.